My name is Judy Moore. I'm 32 years old, and 3 months ago, I sat at a round table under soft ballroom lights while my boyfriend's coworkers laughed about how jobless they thought I was. They didn't know that by Monday morning, I'd be walking into their building as the new CEO. And if I'm being honest, the worst part wasn't the laughter. It was the way my boyfriend laughed too. Small, polite, like he was smoothing wrinkles out of the night. Like my dignity was just an inconvenience he could iron away with a smile. I've been buying struggling companies for 7 years. Quietly, carefully. The kind of work that doesn't come with flashy business cards or LinkedIn brag posts because it's built on one sacred rule: no one sees you coming. I learned the business at 25 from a man named Patterson, an old-school dealmaker who didn't believe in ego, only outcomes. 3 years working under him taught me how to read financial statements the way some people read faces. What's missing, what's hidden, what doesn't add up. I learned how to spot potential buried under bad leadership and how to negotiate purchase terms that keep liabilities from becoming landmines. But the most important lesson wasn't in numbers. It was in silence. Patterson had this saying, "The best dealmaker is the one nobody notices until it's already done." He'd walked away from 2 major acquisitions because someone leaked information at the wrong time. Competitors swooped in. Leadership hid problems. Employees panicked and bailed. The entire deal rotted before the ink even dried. So I keep my work vague, not because I'm ashamed, because I'm professional. My company is called Moore Holdings. It's not a skyscraper with my name on the lobby wall. It's me, a lawyer on retainer, an accountant I trust, and consultants I bring in only when I need them. Most of my work happens at home, in neutral conference rooms, or in the buildings I'm about to own, when I'm still just a consultant to everyone inside. When people ask what I do, I say, business development consulting. That's the truth. It just isn't the whole truth. People hear consulting, and they picture a floating schedule, maybe some freelance hustle, maybe a woman playing entrepreneur on the side while someone else pays the bills. I don't correct them. 3 months ago, I met Daniel through mutual friends. He was 30, warm, easy to talk to, marketing at a mid-sized software company called Mitchell & Hayes Solutions. The kind of guy who made you feel like you weren't being watched, you were being seen. We clicked fast. Dinner turned into weekends. Weekends turned into the familiar quiet comfort of leaving a toothbrush at someone's place. When Daniel asked what I did, I gave him my standard line. He nodded like it was simple, like he understood, and I didn't correct him because the truth was complicated and sealed behind NDAs that could destroy months of work if I slipped. At first, it didn't bother me that he didn't ask more. Most people don't. They hear consulting, and their curiosity stops there. But around 6 weeks in, he started making these little comments that weren't insults, but weren't respect either. "Must be nice having a flexible schedule," he said once with a faint smile. "I wish I could work from home whenever," he said another time, the tone half joking, half envy. Not hostile, not malicious, just revealing. There was an underlying assumption that my work was lighter than his, less real, less structured, like I was playing business while he was living it. I let him assume. Correcting him would mean explaining things I couldn't legally explain. It would mean questions I couldn't answer, and worse, it would mean letting him inside a deal in progress. Because while I was learning Daniel's coffee order and the way he hummed absent-mindedly when he cooked, I was also in the middle of acquiring his company. I didn't know he worked there at first. Mitchell & Hayes had been on my radar for 18 months. Cloud infrastructure space, about 200 employees, decent product, solid client base. The kind of company that should have been doing well. But the financials told a different story. Revenue down year over year. Customer churn high. Operating costs bloated. A sales team claiming growth that didn't match actual revenue recognition. HR complaints buried. Turnover especially brutal in sales and marketing. Classic pattern. Leadership obsessed with looking successful instead of being sustainable. Mitchell & Hayes was bleeding from bad management and a toxic internal culture that rewarded loudness over competence. And the owners, 2 founders who'd started it 15 years earlier, were ready to exit before the whole thing collapsed. Perfect acquisition. I'd been in quiet negotiations with the board for 4 months by the time Daniel and I met. Due diligence had taken 2 months alone. Every contract, every complaint, every department dynamic, every small irregularity that tends to become a lawsuit later. The deal was structured to close the first week of December. Then, one night in October, Daniel mentioned the company name casually at dinner, complaining about a new initiative he didn't believe in, and I nearly choked on my drink. I didn't show it. I smiled, asked a couple casual questions, and filed the information away like a knife sliding back into its sheath. From that point on, I knew. The professional world I was stepping into and the personal world I was building had just collided. Daniel talked about his team, his manager, and the office drama that came like weather. He mentioned an annual recognition event they held every year. Hotel ballroom, open bar, award ceremony, the whole corporate "we're a family" performance. The one night everyone actually has fun, he said. You should come. It's important. I want you to meet everyone. He also mentioned a man named Troy more than once. Sales lead, mid-40s, been there over a decade. Loud, charismatic, and, according to Daniel, someone you didn't want to get on the wrong side of. The moment I heard the name, my stomach tightened, because due diligence had flagged Troy like a flare in the dark. Multiple complaints over the years about his behavior, aggressive sales tactics bordering on fraudulent, systematic undermining of junior employees who showed talent, HR documentation that went nowhere because Troy brought in deals. Only he didn't. The audit showed the truth. Inflated metrics, contracts counted as revenue before they closed, exaggerated values, even deals that didn't exist. 40% of his reported numbers were smoke and mirrors. Troy was exactly the kind of person I remove immediately when I take over, not because I enjoy firing people, but because companies rot from the top of a toxic culture. You can't heal an organization while a cancer sits at the center pretending it's the heartbeat. But I couldn't tell Daniel any of this. Not without breaking NDAs that could kill the acquisition, not without risking months of work, millions of dollars, and the livelihoods of people inside that building who didn't even know they were standing on a trapdoor. So I watched. I listened. I kept my expressions smooth while my mind tracked everything, like I always do. Last Friday, Daniel invited me to the recognition gala. The deal was closing at midnight that same night. That meant I would be sitting at a table with people celebrating their company, while the papers were being finalized to transfer it into my hands. I should have said no. I should have avoided the entire thing. But there was a twisted inevitability to it, like the universe was leaning in, whispering, "Let's see who they are when they think you're powerless." So I said yes. I wore my charcoal suit, tailored, sharp, understated. When I picked Daniel up, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully name. "You clean up nice," he said, like he was surprised I owned something that fit me that well. It was a small moment, a tiny comment, but it landed like a warning, because surprise means expectation, and expectation means he'd already placed me somewhere in his mind, somewhere smaller than who I actually was. We arrived at the hotel at 7. The ballroom was beautiful in that corporate way, white tablecloths, centerpieces in company colors, a stage with professional lighting, 2 bartenders already busy. Around 200 people, most of the company dressed up and ready to perform happiness for one night. Daniel squeezed my hand. "You're going to love this," he said, bright and proud. And I smiled back, because I already knew something he didn't. By the time these lights went out tonight, everything would change. And by Monday morning, I'd find out whether the man holding my hand was actually standing with me, or just borrowing me to impress the room. Daniel didn't give me time to breathe once we were inside the ballroom. He was excited, almost relieved, to finally introduce me to the world he'd been describing for months. His hand stayed at the small of my back as he guided me from table to table, smiling, nodding, saying my name like it belonged there. "This is Judy," he said again and again, "my girlfriend." At first, it was pleasant. His marketing team came first. 5 people clustered near the bar. They were friendly in that polished, practiced way. Compliments on my dress. Questions about how long Daniel and I had been together. Then, inevitably, the question. "So what do you do, Judy?" I gave my standard answer. Business development consulting. Polite nods followed. One of the women smiled and said, "That sounds flexible." Another added, "Must be nice having control over your own schedule." I smiled back, took a sip of water, filed it away. We moved on to product development next. A couple of sharp questions came my way, real ones, about market shifts and scaling challenges. I answered carefully, deflecting specifics while staying accurate. One man in particular, Justin, watched me closely as I spoke, thoughtful, curious. I made a mental note. Then HR. Patricia, the director. She spoke about culture initiatives and continuous improvement. I nodded while my mind cross-referenced her words with the stack of ignored complaints I'd read during due diligence. The disconnect was almost impressive. And then we reached Daniel's assigned table. That's where Troy was. He stood as we approached, tall, broad, already flushed from his second drink. He had the kind of presence that pushed outward, filling space without asking permission. His handshake lingered just a second too long, his grip firm in a way that wasn't about greeting. It was about measuring. "So, you're Judy," he said loudly, like he wanted the whole table to hear. "I've heard a lot about you." Something in his tone told me that wasn't true. Introductions went around the table. Sales guys under him, a woman from accounting, a couple of people from departments that orbited Troy's influence. Everyone laughed easily, watching him more than each other, waiting for cues on when to speak. Troy's eyes settled back on me. "So what do you do for work?" I answered calmly. "Business consulting and development." His eyebrows lifted. "Which firm?" "I'm independent." That was the moment. I watched his energy shift, like a switch flipped behind his eyes. The smile stayed, but it sharpened. He leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms wide. "Independent," he repeated. "So, freelancing." A few chuckles rippled around the table. "You could say that," I replied. He glanced at Daniel, then back at me. "That's what we're calling unemployed these days, huh?" Laughter this time, louder, less polite. I looked at Daniel. He smiled weakly and looked down at his phone. "I'm employed," I said evenly. "I just work for myself." Troy wasn't done. "Self-employed? Doing what exactly?" He made air quotes with his fingers. "Websites? Online stores? Social media stuff?" Someone added, "Drop shipping?" Another voice chimed in. "Crypto?" The table warmed to it. The jokes stacked on top of each other like they were building something together, something ugly. I took a slow sip of water and waited. What was I supposed to say? That I was buying the company they were celebrating? That I'd read the audit proving Troy had been fabricating sales numbers for years? I couldn't, and they knew I couldn't, even if they didn't understand why. Daniel finally spoke, but not how I needed him to. "Judy, don't get defensive," he said with a light laugh. "Troy's just messing around. He does this with everyone." He turned to the table with an apologetic smile. "She's very humble about her work, almost too humble." It landed worse than silence. He wasn't defending me, he was explaining me, framing my restraint as a personality quirk instead of what it was, survival under legal obligation. The jokes kept coming. "Must be nice not having a boss breathing down your neck," said someone from accounting. "My cousin does freelance web design," another added. "The market's rough right now." A sales guy leaned in. "No quotas, no pressure, living the dream." Daniel laughed along, squeezed my arm like it was support, whispered, "Relax, it's just banter." It didn't feel like banter. It felt like being slowly stripped down in public while everyone pretended it was a game. By dessert, the room was loud. People were on their third or fourth drinks. The awards had been handed out. The lighting felt harsher now. That's when Troy stood. He raised his glass, voice carrying across the ballroom. "Hey, Judy, real talk for a second." The room quieted enough to listen. "Tomorrow we're getting a new CEO after this acquisition closes. Big changes coming." He grinned. "You should send in your resume. Might be a good opportunity. Entry level, maybe assistant to someone in business development." The table erupted. Someone clapped. Someone wiped tears from their eyes. Daniel laughed behind his wineglass, soft, embarrassed laughter, like he wasn't sure whether to join or hide. I smiled, nodded. "I'll think about it," I said. "Thanks for the advice." What I didn't say was that I knew exactly who the new CEO was, that I'd spent 4 months negotiating that deal, that Troy would be fired within 48 hours, not for mocking me, but for fraud. At 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a single text from my attorney. "Deal closes midnight. Board meeting. 8:30 a.m., Monday. You address leadership at 9. All documents signed. Congratulations." I excused myself to the restroom and sat in a stall for 5 full minutes, breathing through the weight of it all. The deal, the room, the man I was dating. By the time I came back, Troy was in full performance mode, offering to help me polish my LinkedIn, asking if I knew how to use Excel, joking about mentoring me through my first real job. Daniel didn't stop him once. At 11:30, I suggested we leave. Daniel agreed easily, thanking everyone, laughing off last jokes about my job search. On the drive home, Daniel was tipsy and cheerful. "That was fun, right?" he said. "Everyone really liked you. I think they appreciated that you could take a joke." I stared out the window. At midnight, I checked my email at a red light 2 blocks from his apartment. Transaction complete. Acquisition finalized at 11:47 p.m. Mitchell and Hayes Solutions was officially mine. I kissed Daniel goodnight. He smiled, told me I was a good sport. And I drove home knowing that by Monday morning, the room that laughed at me would finally understand what they'd done. Monday morning came faster than I expected. I arrived at the Mitchell and Hayes building at 8:25 a.m., dressed the same way I always do when I'm about to take control of something fragile, neutral colors, clean lines, nothing that distracted from authority. The lobby looked tired, worn carpet, furniture that had seen better years, a company that had been holding its breath for too long. The receptionist glanced up, surprised to see someone in a suit that early. "I'm here for the board meeting," I said calmly. She nodded, still unsure who I was, and pointed me toward the elevators. At 8:30, I sat in a small conference room with the board and Gerald, the interim CEO. 30 minutes of alignment, messaging, transition timeline, immediate priorities. They looked relieved, like people who'd been waiting for a lifeboat and could finally stop pretending they were fine swimming. At 9 o'clock sharp, the leadership team gathered. 40 people filled the room. Department heads, managers, key contributors. I watched them file in through the glass walls, recognizing faces from Friday night. Some looked tired. Some looked confused. Then Daniel walked in. He was talking to someone from his team, coffee in hand, professional and polished, completely unaware. He took a seat in the third row. Troy arrived early, of course, loud even in the morning, holding court near the coffee station, telling some story that had his sales guys laughing on cue. At exactly 9:00, Gerald stood. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here on short notice. As you all know, Mitchell and Hayes Solutions has been acquired. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter." He paused, turned toward the door. "I'd like to introduce our new owner and CEO. Please welcome Judy Moore, founder of Moore Holdings." I walked in. The silence hit like a physical force. Troy froze mid-sip, coffee cup hovering inches from his mouth. His face drained in real time as recognition slammed into him. I watched the moment his mind replayed Friday night. Every joke, every laugh, now reframed. Daniel's reaction was slower, but more devastating. His color vanished. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. His eyes locked onto mine, wide with disbelief, panic, and something like betrayal. Though he was the last person entitled to feel it. I took my place at the front of the room. The people who hadn't been at the gala just looked curious, but the ones who had, they knew. I saw it in their posture, in the way they avoided my eyes. Brad from sales looked physically ill. The woman from accounting stared at her notebook like it might swallow her whole. I began my address. Professional, calm, familiar words I'd spoken many times before. I talked about restructuring, about transparency, about restoring trust, internally and externally, about investing in people who did real work instead of rewarding noise. Then I said it. I'm committed to building a company culture where people are valued for their skills and character, not judged by assumptions or superficial impressions. I let the sentence breathe. Troy shifted in his chair. When I opened the floor for questions, his hand shot up immediately, desperate to reclaim space. "Yes, Troy," I said evenly. He cleared his throat. "I'm just processing. When exactly did this acquisition start?" 4 months ago, I replied. Due diligence began in August, agreement signed in October. The deal closed Friday at 11:47 p.m. I watched the math land. He'd mocked me less than 72 hours before signing away his career. "Any other questions?" I asked. No one spoke. The HVAC hummed. Someone coughed. I dismissed the meeting. As people filed out, Daniel tried to catch my eye. I didn't give it to him. By the afternoon, the work began. Meetings, evaluations, truths rising where silence had lived. At 1:00 p.m., there was a knock on my office door. Daniel stood there, pale, eyes red. "Can we talk?" he asked. I gestured to the chair. The door closed. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, words tumbling out. "How long did you know? Was this some kind of setup?" I leaned back. The acquisition was in progress before we met. Finding out you worked here was coincidence. NDAs prevented me from saying anything. "You let them humiliate you," he said, voice rising. "You made me look stupid." I met his eyes. "I didn't make you do anything. You laughed. You minimized. You chose comfort over standing up for me." He tried to argue, tried to justify. I slid a folder across the desk, his performance reviews. "Your job depends on your work," I said quietly, "not our relationship." He stared at the papers, at the truth. And for the first time, the room wasn't laughing. Daniel sat there for a long moment, staring at the folder like it might bite him if he touched it. "I can't believe you went through my file," he finally said, voice tight. "That's invasive." "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to." "It's called due diligence," I replied. "I have a file on every employee in this building. Yours isn't special, and this process started months before you and I ever met." He shook his head slowly, like he was trying to rearrange the story in his favor. "So what? This whole relationship was fake. You were investigating me the entire time?" "No," I said firmly. "Our relationship was real. Your assumptions weren't." Silence settled between us, thick, uncomfortable. He flipped through the pages now, missed deadlines, incomplete projects, feedback from his manager about avoiding responsibility and coasting through safe tasks. Nothing catastrophic, but nothing impressive either. "Are you going to fire me?" he asked quietly. "That depends on you," I said. "You'll be treated the same as everyone else." His jaw tightened. "This is humiliating." I leaned forward. "You know what was humiliating? Sitting at a table while your coworkers mocked my career for 3 hours and watching you laugh along because it was easier than saying stop." His eyes flashed. "You know how Troy is. That's just the culture here." I held his gaze. "Then the culture is broken." He left my office without another word. 2 days later, Troy was terminated. Not because of Friday night, not because of his jokes, but because the forensic audit confirmed what I already knew. Years of inflated numbers, fabricated contracts, and deliberate misrepresentation. He signed his termination papers without severance in exchange for silence and a non-compete that would haunt him longer than any public scandal. The building breathed differently after that. 2 more managers followed him out. Junior employees stepped into roles they'd earned long ago. The noise faded. The work began. Daniel was placed on a 90-day performance improvement plan. Clear goals, real support, no excuses. He didn't make it. Deadlines missed. Work delegated, then claimed. Feedback ignored. Each week documented. Each chance offered. When HR gave him notice, he didn't argue. He just said, "This isn't fair." But fairness had never been his problem. The rumors started after he left, that I'd abused my power, that this was revenge. I didn't respond. 3 months later, a junior employee brought me a photo from the gala. Troy pointing at me, laughing. Daniel smiling beside him. Proof. I filed it away. Not for satisfaction, for record. 6 months after acquisition, revenue was up, turnover was down, the culture was unrecognizable. And me? I was finally honest, with everyone I met afterward.